Welcome to Self-Hacked Radio, where cutting-edge science meets cutting-edge health. Hey everybody, it's Joe from selfhack.com. In this episode, I interviewed Dr. Gerald Pollack. This is a must-hear episode. Dr. Pollack is a really sweet guy, as you'll see in the interview, and he's also an authentic and genuine guy. Something I respect about him is that he's willing to take risks for his reputation. I believe that's part of the reason he's been making discoveries that nobody else has been making. As a scientist, it's very frowned upon to make suggestions that something may benefit your health when it's not proven through clinical trials. But the problem is, there's no money to create these trials, and not telling people about these ideas can also be harmful. So I applaud him on that. I think we can learn from his personality just as much as we can from his science. His book is called The Fourth Phase of Water, and it has 4.9 stars on Amazon. It's a very good book, and I suggest people read it. He grew up in a neighborhood near mine, actually, in Brooklyn, New York. I want to give you a heads up that this interview is a little advanced, but I hope it's comprehensible. I recommend watching his other lectures and reading his book to get a better background. Now, just to give you the basic idea of easy water, because that's what we will be discussing in the video. Easy water is simply water that is more polar, which means that there's a negative and positive charge that are more separated than ordinary water. So this water is more like a battery. This results in a lot of interesting properties of water, and especially for our health. I've been appreciating the fact that many people with chronic health issues have low oxygen, and this could be from bad blood flow. And as you'll see in the interview, we discuss how that may come from a lack of easy water in our body. And we also discussed that actually most of the water in your body is made up of this special kind of charged water. And since 99% of the molecules in our body are water, this has a very big impact on our body. Get ready for some Brooklyn Jew meets Brooklyn Jew. Hello everybody, I'm here with Dr. Pollack. He is a professor at the University of Washington in the bioengineering department. He's on the cutting edge of researching water. To the best of your ability, can you explain what role easy has in the body, easy water?
Yeah, so easy water is the so-called fourth phase of water that we discovered over the past few years. And it's a phase of water that's different from the waters that we know about. So we know about the solid, the liquid, and the vapor. Ice, liquid, and vapor. But for more than 100 years, it's been speculated that there needs to be a fourth phase of water in order to explain what's going on. And we have found evidence, a lot of evidence. It's in the book that you mentioned, to describe this fourth phase of water. This is a kind of ordered phase. The molecules are not they're not randomly oriented as in ordinary H2O. They're actually organized in a way. And so it turns out, to answer your question, that this is really the water that fills our cells. Our cells, we all know that cells are filled with, that we're 2/3 water, but it's actually more impressive when you think of the fraction of our molecules that are water. The 2/3, water molecule is really small, so to fill that 2/3 volume, you need a lot of water molecules. And it turns out, if you do the arithmetic, that if you go down the count of molecules in your body, 99 out of 100 of them are water molecules. So we're filled with water. But that water, it turns out, is the fourth phase water. And the reason it is, there's evidence for 50 years or so that the water inside the cell is structured. It's not the ordinary H2O. This water that I'm talking about has a negative charge, and the water, this fourth phase, and the water just beyond that actually has a positive charge. So it's kind of like a battery, and it appears usually it appears next to interfaces. So if you have a solid and a hydrophilic, water-loving solid, and you put just ordinary H2O next to it, this stuff builds, and it builds automatically. So if you think of your cells are filled with a matrix of proteins and other macromolecules that are charged, hydrophilic. And any water that's next to it is going to be ordered, structured, fourth phase, easy water. And so your cells are just filled with this stuff. And incidentally, you didn't ask me, but I'll tell you, the cells have negative charge. This is known for 60 years, and it's not controversial or debatable. However, the reason the cell has negative charge, there are theories out there that have something to do with the cell membrane pumping different ions inside and outside the cell and being restricted by ion selective channels. But all that is not so clear. I think clearer is, and more accurate, is the idea that your cell is filled with this negatively charged water, you see. And so you have something that's filled with a lot of negative charges, and of course it's going to be negatively charged. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out.
But what happens to the positive charge there? For the negative charges, there are positive charges as well. What happens to those? Good
question. The positive charges go out of your body. For example, every time you breathe, when you breathe out water vapor and you breathe out carbon dioxide. So together, those two form carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is rich with protons, and those protons get ejected. So if you were to breathe out into some water and you put litmus paper, you'd see that the pH value goes down, which means you're getting rid of protons. And you get rid of protons in many ways. It's not just that. When you pee, you got low pH. You're getting rid of protons. When you sweat, you're getting rid of protons. It's also low pH. And a friend of mine actually was measuring his body potential, and he took a dump, and it turned out he got rid of positive charge. So your body is designed to get rid of that positive charge and retain the negative charge.
Wow, so we're getting rid of it in 4 different ways through
I think so. Yeah.
Urine, sweat, and breathing.
Yeah,
and
you get rid of it.
Yeah, I was reading actually there was a recent study that it was trying to figure out where did all the calories go, and they found that a lot of them, almost all of them, went out in CO2 or something like that.
All the calories went out in CO2?
It wasn't the molecules. They were trying to trace all the molecules, where the carbon's going from the food you eat, and all these things. And I think it turned out that it was getting excreted as CO2. It was something like that. It was
Well, that could make sense. A lot of people, or some people, don't even eat. Maybe you know about that. There's lots of evidence now. They get their energy somehow without food. And I've been in touch with the people who are studying those. I mean, you were talking about food and calories and such. It just brought to mind. So the question is, if it's really true, and I believe it's true because I've seen the evidence in great detail, including this fellow from India who maybe you know about this one, who went to the government and told the people that for 65 years he hasn't eaten a morsel of food, nor has he drunk any, but it's very humid there. Of course, nobody believed him, but then they did tests, and some physicians put him into the hospital for a couple of weeks, and they examined everything. They had a cardiologist and a physiologist and a urologist and every ologist you can think of. They had a group of 15 of them, and for two weeks, I think 10 days or 2 weeks, I forget, he neither drank anything nor did he eat anything. And so, of course, you can't prove that he didn't do it for 65 years, but the evidence is pretty clear. So I mean, the question is, well, gee, if you don't eat, so where does the energy come from? And
so you're saying that you think it's coming from the sun, and you think it's wow.
Indirectly, the sun's energy basically it's just like the first step of photosynthesis. So all the plant's energy comes from the sun. The plant absorbs the light, and it transduces the light into a number of steps of photosynthesis, but effectively all the energy that the plant needs for growth, metabolism, flow, it all comes from the sun. You see, and our evidence is that light is what builds this fourth phase. Actually, it's mostly infrared light, but light in general. So when this phase of water is built, I told you it's negatively charged, and the region beyond is positive. So it's like a battery, and the battery contains energy, electrical energy. So essentially, what you get from sunlight is you get energy. You see, so go on.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, and so you're saying that most of the charge within the cell is negative, and that's because of this easy fourth phase water.
Right.
Now, does that relate that so that basically directly what the oxidation reduction potential of the cell is, in a way? No, because there's a negative charge, and the redox potential of the cell is basically it could give over electrons. So if it has a large store of electrons, it could give it over. That's how it combats free radicals.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's even more fundamental than that. I think this negative charge that's inside the cell is used for everything. The body needs negative charge, and so it's useful. So free radicals, and antioxidants. We all know that antioxidants are good for our health, and there have been probably no fewer than a few dozen different mechanisms that have been suggested. But I think it's actually simpler than that. It's we want to keep those negative charges, and so oxidants. If you remember oxidation, reduction is the gain of electrons, and oxidation is the loss of electrons. You don't want to lose those electrons because you lose negative charge, and so the oxidants would tend to take away the negative charges. Antioxidants will preserve the negative charge, and you need that negative charge to be healthy.
So I think that's how water is, in essence, one of the most basic antioxidants of the cell.
I didn't hear which one is
the easy water is basically the most basic antioxidant, the most fundamental antioxidant of the cell.
Really a brilliant way of putting it. I never thought of that.
Yeah, no, because that's actually one of the redox potential of somebody. I feel like the people I deal with who have health issues, I feel like their redox potential is off, and not having enough structured water in your body is one of the reasons, one of the most basic things that I was able to come to, and that's why I was so interested in interviewing you. Would you happen to know how easy water affects blood flow, maybe? Because you did study, the fact that it could make water move when you have these differential charges. Did you study that at all? Like how it affects blood flow?
We're beginning to study. So this is another interesting question that you posed. So the experiment was we took a tube like a straw made of hydrophilic material. So the hydrophilic material are the ones that build the easy next to it. So, and one of the students, this is an undergraduate student, I think 18, 19 years old. He was just playing around in the lab, and he stuck one of these tubes in the water, and he came running to my office to tell me the results. What happened was that the water was running right through the inside of the tube, as though someone was slurping and pulling at one end of the tube, pulling the water through. But usually you need pressure to push water through tubes, like your heart is pushing water through your blood through your blood vessels. Otherwise, blood wouldn't flow in theory. So we studied this, and it's kind of amazing because it looks like you're getting something for nothing. You're getting flow through a tube without energy, but the energy is really there. It's the fact that the water absorbs light energy, including infrared, ultraviolet, that's in the environment. You can't get rid of it. And the water is absorbing it, and that energy is getting converted into mechanical energy, driving the flow through the tube. So we had the idea that this kind of energy that's used very well by plants and unicellular organisms, is it possible that humans or animals too use this same kind of energy? And I'm not saying that we photosynthesize exactly, but we do take in light energy. And we have Mother Nature faces two choices: one, throw it away, and the other is use it. And Mother Nature, in her wisdom, I think might actually use it. And the way it could happen is, this happened after I sat together with a couple of Russian scientists at Moscow University, and they were telling me that there's a real problem with blood circulation. So I said, what's the problem? I thought there's no problem because I began my career modeling blood flow in the cardiovascular system, so I thought I knew something about it. They said, oh, no, you don't know anything. It can't work. what do you mean it can't work? It works. They said, there's a real problem because, you have capillaries, and the capillaries are pretty small. It turns out that in healthy people like yourself, that the size of the capillaries is smaller than the size of the red blood cells that need to pass through. So this is like a plumbing problem, sort of like your toilet and having the outflow smaller than the stuff that has to pass through it. It's, you need
energy.
You need energy. You need energy to do it. And they said if the heart is responsible for this, they calculated that the heart would need to generate something like 1 million times the amount of pressure that it actually. So you need help. So where does the help come from? So we knew that in these tubes, that light was responsible. That's the driving energy for driving the flow through these tubes. We could even add more light. We get faster flow. So the idea came, hey, maybe the light that we absorb is used to drive the flow through the capillaries. And so we're testing it right now, and we're not sure of this, but there was an Israeli study, which is pretty interesting. This Israeli study, they were studying blood flow in mice, and they did their experiment. I don't recall what their experiment was. And after the experiment was over, of course, they sacrificed the mouse. That's the usual thing after the experiment. And they were monitoring the blood flow with some advanced technique, optical coherence tomography, but that's not so important. They noticed after they killed the mouse, the blood kept flowing and flowing and flowing. So 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, more than an hour. They said, this can't be. They repeated their experiment 10 times.
The heart stopped working, so couldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, okay.
Yeah, heart stopped working. So what's driving the blood flow? Well, this device that they use shines light in order for the device to work, in order to monitor the flow. And they measure some properties of the scattered light. So what they're doing, I think, probably, is using light, and that light is driving the flow in the capillaries that they measure. So this is a hint that maybe we're onto something. It would be phenomenally interesting that your blood flow in capillaries, and also lymph, probably nobody knows exactly what drives the lymph. They're suggesting maybe it's a muscle contraction or something, but nobody really knows. You have a second system in your body that has fluid flow, and the mechanism of flow is unknown. So the light can be really, really important in all this.
That's astounding. And also, so the blood vessels, they have the same properties as that Nafion tube that you used in your studies.
They should. Basically, hydrophilic is really what counts. We found that essentially all hydrophilic, water-loving surfaces do that, and those endothelial cells that line the capillaries should be just like that.
And would you think that suggests that basically the amount of structured water in your body, the redox potential of your cells and things like that if that was lower, if you had less of that, the blood flow would be more stagnant in some ways?
Well, that's not exactly. I think
okay.
See, the blood has to flow. So okay. This easy water is highly viscous. You don't want your blood to be like ketchup, you see, and that's inside your blood, you just want to make sure that it doesn't become easy water because of this. It's like egg white or something like that. You want the blood flow to flow, so you want to make sure you don't have easy.
But you want your endothelial cells to have that.
That's fine, sure, the endothelial cells, but not the moving blood.
Not the moving blood, I see. So the endothelial cells, the redox potential of those, or the easy structured water in the endothelial cells, could determine the flow rate or influence the flow rate?
Yeah, it could, because right next to the endothelial cells should grow this easy water, right?
Right.
And it's not only a sort of liner to reduce the friction, but also it produces the same effect as those tubes that I mentioned, the tubes in water. And just a point, a lot of people talk about redox potential. I could never understand redox potential. It's very complicated, and I like to talk about charge. I think charge is simpler. If you have more negative charge, usually more negative charge is the same as, if you can define it, redox potential. Right. So I would vote for eliminating that term completely
I
from everybody's vocabulary and sticking to simple things like charge, or voltage, or
Very,
something like that.
very good point. Yeah, it gets to the heart of it much more. What do you and also basically the whole body is working through protein interactions. There's methylation, there's phosphorylation. Did you study at all how the easy water affects these protein interactions? I mean, there's so many. If you look at the charts, you see like black boxes. They don't know how these proteins are interacting with a whole bunch of other proteins. Does the easy water, if the easy water affects these protein interactions in a very significant way, that's just massive for the body.
Yeah, I mean, you're asking a question whose answer I think is is moving along in a different direction. See, I view the cell differently. I view it the same way as Albert St. Georgi, who won the Nobel Prize and is everybody's scientific hero from 50, 60 years ago. He talked about the cell being a matrix of structured water, and in this matrix exists all the proteins and nucleic acid and all that. So that the water, we say EZ water, the structured water, whatever, is actually more central even than the proteins are sitting and embedded in it. You know, if you read a current, like a biochemistry book or something, they talk about these, well, rather mysterious charts, as you mentioned, with one interacting with the other somehow, but they never talk about how they get there.
Right,
You know?
exactly. They don't.
Yeah.
They don't, yeah. It's just
So
this mechanism. You know, it's like a domino. This goes to this goes to this, but they don't tell you how.
they don't tell you how, and you know, I think one possibility is they don't actually get there. That their signal is transmitted in different ways, maybe through the water. The water. See, the water. I mentioned to you that the water is structured and ordered and such, but it's not. The evidence is not always when something happens to the cell. Like if you take a muscle cell, we studied muscles for many years. In the muscle cell, if the muscle's relaxed, not contracting, all the water, most of the water is ordered. But when it contracts, what happens is the water undergoes a transition from this ordered water to ordinary water. You see, and it's a trend. And then when the muscle stops contracting, it goes back again to the ordered water. So it's a transition between the easy water, ordinary water, and then back to easy water again. And that's an important driver of so many events in biology. And I discussed this in my earlier book, Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life. That, you know, this book attempts to describe the role of water in cells. And most biochemists and cell biologists don't think of water as anything more than the background carrier of the more important molecules of life. And the book argues as the opposite, that the water is absolutely central and to everything that the cell does practically. And many people thought so 50 years ago, 100 years ago, but scientists have lost interest in water. But I think water is still central. And that transition between ordered and disordered is driving so many things inside your cells.
So that would cast a very big shadow on all the biochemistry work that's been done for the last 50 years or whatever. No, because a lot of times they're studying these things without water. They get rid of the water.
Yeah, I know. What can I say? I think you're right on. If you read the biochemistry books, they're really thick, and they get thicker with each passing year, and the mechanisms are almost hopelessly complicated. You have to immerse yourself to try to figure out what they think is going on. And, you know, it's really hard to imagine that biology is really so complicated. Sure, it's intricate, there are many details, but the basic principles ought to be simple. You know, we used to think that nature works... Yeah, sorry?
Occam's razor. You got to go to...
Occam's razor. Yeah, sure. Occam's razor. You know, you choose the simplest of possible mechanisms, not the more complicated. And scientists have thought that for many years, but we seem to have lost sight. It's true in physics, too. Physics has become so incredibly complicated. There's no intuition left in understanding the basics of physics. You have to study mathematics, and it's all relegated to mathematics. So, you know, one wonders if science has actually gone astray.
Right. So there's a whole bunch of things that I'm curious how they interact with EZ. Would you know how ATP interacts with EZ? It's fine if you're, you know, because I'm sure that a lot of it's just unknown at this point.
Well, there's actually there's something about ATP. You know, when ATP was discovered, how many years ago? I forgot. There were some papers from some chemists a few years after that that said it's all wrong. There is no high energy bond, and this issue was discussed in great length in various books by one Gilbert Ling. And Gilbert was kind of a mentor of mine. He spent many years studying the structured water inside the cells, and he brings to mind the fact that something is not quite right with ATP. ATP is obviously there, it's needed, and he thought, and actually I tend to agree with him, that he calls this a cardinal adsorbent site. In other words, when ATP binds to a certain site, it produces a hefty negative charge, and this negative charge is very important for building the structure. And I think he's probably onto something. So the original idea that ATP has a high energy bond has been challenged, and to my knowledge, nobody has ever responded to that challenge.
That's really interesting.
I
Now,
think to just amplify on that, so we think that that ATP and ATP hydrolysis is the very basis of all of the energy, and I think that the charge is the basis of all of that energy, the negative charge. So it's
that's
a different point of view.
that's fascinating. Now, I'm curious about a whole bunch of how a whole bunch of things interact with either create or destroy the easy, such as boiling, heating, or making cold water or freezing water. You do mention in your book that the freezing creates that's more of a crystal structure, which is kind of similar to the easy. What about cold water?
Yeah. Okay. So in our experiments, what we found is you take room temperature water, and you have some nucleating surface, a hydrophilic surface like Nafion, and you reduce the temperature. So we weren't sure what to expect, and we found, astonishingly, that once we started reducing the temperature substantially, this easy grew, and it grew enormously, and it grew like crazy when the temperature went way down, and then that turned to ice. So the easy turned to ice, and it wasn't a surprise exactly because the easy structure that we deduced is almost the same structure as ice. All you need to do with this easy structure is add protons, add positive charge, and you get ice. And so we have experiments that show that if you want to freeze water, it doesn't go from H2O to ice. It goes from H2O to easy water and then to ice. And if you melt the ice, it goes from ice to easy water and then to ordinary water. And that's probably the reason why when that some people think about the glacial melt, that water that's full of minerals and has health benefits. And I think the reason it has health benefits is it's full of easy water. Basically what you're doing is drinking, and by drinking the easy water, you're replacing the easy water that may be missing from your cells, that's keeping you not as healthy as you would like to be.
So, do you for yourself? I know this. The medical, you cannot make any medical claims, of course, but for yourself, do you try to drink colder water?
Well, actually, there is a tendency for me to do it. I was flying yesterday, and of course, I asked the flight attendant for lots of ice in my water. Maybe it comes naturally.
Your body's craving it.
I think my body's craving it. We drink all kinds of waters. A lot of people approach me, and they all have different kinds of waters that they claim have health benefits. And actually, I've seen in some cases, some of them may be charlatans, but in other cases, I've seen the evidence. It's really clear that some of these waters can even reverse pathologies. So many people want to give us samples of their water for us to drink at home, where I'm speaking to from home right now. And I kept telling them, no, we don't want to do it because we want to remain neutral, because we'd like to compare these different waters in the future and see which ones have the most health benefits. And my wife told me, well, you're crazy. Why don't we just, instead of drinking none of them, why don't we drink all of them?
Right.
So we've been enjoying lots of different waters. And so I guess I need to tell you that there are a few cases where I've seen evidence for remarkable properties of some of these waters. And 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I would have said this is the biggest nonsense in the world. But when you think of it in terms of drinking a kind of water that replaces the water inside your cells, then it's a different story. So, for example, we often do juicing. Maybe, so you take the juice and put it through, and or the vegetables and fruits and put it through and drink the juice. You're actually drinking cell water, cell water from the plants. And
I
so,
drink a juice every day, a vegetable juice.
well, that's why you look so healthy.
I appreciate that.
No, you look robust and full of health and energy. The so-called alternative medicine physicians that I've come into contact with in the past few years, many of them say, well, the first thing they do when the patient comes in, it doesn't matter what the problem is, they say, juice, drink the juice of the vegetables and the fruits like kale. It doesn't taste that good, but it's actually...
My mother actually raised all of us on, whenever anyone got sick or anything like that, drink a vegetable juice. And
really?
And she got that from somebody who was even more old school. So this has been a phenomenon ever since juicing came, those machines were able to be juiced. So yeah, there's been people, I've been drinking juices since I was 3. And I'm 28 now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it really makes sense. And some of the waters that I mentioned, as apart from the juices, some of them contain easy water because we know how to measure easy water. And we've sampled some, not all, some of them contain substantial amounts of easy water. In fact, some of the people who make the water have been calling it rich with easy or rich with H3O2, which is easy. And, well, I guess they can call it whatever they want. But I've seen cases where it absolutely can reverse pathologies. And one was one guy called me 4 years ago, and he started telling me about the water that the family is drinking, which he had learned about in a laboratory in which he worked. And he said, we never have a flu or anything anymore. No, okay, big deal. Then he said one of the neighbors knew somebody who had irreversible kidney pathology, and she was on dialysis and waiting for a transplant. And she thought, hey, can I try some of this stuff? So she tried it, and he told me that at the end of the month, she went from irreversible pathology to no pathology. So my response was, I don't believe you. Actually, I did. But so he sent me the hospital records, and since then, I've seen hospital records of many more people like that. And a colleague, a friend of mine, went to visit and interviewed the people who he claimed had been cured, and they confirmed it. So this is very interesting stuff.
So what about boiling water? Would you know if that would have the opposite effect, maybe, or heating water, or it's just
that's a difficult one to say. And I guess I would tend to opt out because when you heat the water, very complicated things happen, more complicated than you think. And I think the answer is not clear. Better go on to another question
because I'm not. The bubbles are forming, so you're saying that could help create easy, but then
exactly. You got a lot of complicated the bubbles that you see. Actually, they look like spheres, and the reason they're spheres is they have a membrane. The membrane is easy. You see, so it begins to become complicated to understand the dynamics. And I've discussed it in the book, but it's not a simple yes/no answer.
Right. Now. You also talk about putting minerals in. I mean, like if water has minerals, that is easier to create easy as well, right?
It's easier, right? Easier. It's easy to remember that kind of water. Easy. Right. Yeah. So
I'm actually curious though. What happens when you combine a whole bunch of different modalities? Like let's say, so easy is best created through infrared light. What happens when you combine infrared light, minerals, cold? Did you study combining different methods in one type of water, or you just study them separately?
We study them separately. Unfortunately, in Seattle, the day has 24 hours, and so we can't get around that limitation. And carrying out all the studies, they're intriguing, interesting, but in order to do that, you need money, and money is, especially for a subject like this. Of course, everybody's interested in water, but the granting agencies are not necessarily interested in the sort of alternative science that this embodies. So you can't do every experiment that you'd like to do. But, we did find that if you want to build easy water, that infrared is the way to do it. We also have some evidence that ultraviolet, the shorter wavelengths, actually they don't necessarily build EZ very much, but they separate charges in the existing EZ. So you kind of recharge the battery somewhat
Mm.
with that. That's preliminary evidence. We're not sure. We're still investigating that.
That's fascinating. So that would suggest that the sun, with the UV and the infrared, has these unique properties.
Oh yeah,
Combining.
sure. The sun is amazing. You know, you go out where you live. There's a lot of sunshine in Seattle in the winter. It's gloomy. we have we have a lot of clouds, and you know it doesn't rain every day, but it rains quite a lot. And when the sun pokes its head through, everybody feels great. So why do they feel great? Well, you know, it could be a purely psychological issue, but I think it's more than that. I think the wavelengths of energy that we get from the sun restore us. It's like going into a sauna, right? You go, you're feeling rotten, your muscles are aching, you got a headache, you feel depressed, and you go into the sauna for 20 minutes or so, and you come out and you feel like renewed, like a new person. And so I think it's the energy that we get. The sauna contains a lot of infrared. It's hot, it's warm, and we absorb the water inside our bodies, absorb that energy, and turn our water into EZ water. And so our cells, all the EZ water that we need in our cells for proper functioning, get built up by this kind of energy, and that's why it works.
It's getting built, and also you're sweating out the positive
Right.
the positive ions. So it's a 1-2 hit.
Right, it's a 1-2 hit. Absolutely. Yeah.
Two birds
Really.
with one stone. People have asked you this before. I'm just curious if there's any updates with distilled reverse osmosis water. Do you know anything like about that in EZ yet, or it's?
Well, you know, the measurements that we have, we use this stuff in our experiments because a lot of critics, so to speak, would like to say that many of these things occur because of contamination. There's been a history of that for 50 years of scientists studying water being criticized. And so any scientist who's doing experiments on water will always want to use distilled deionized water to prevent that kind of negative feedback. But see, this is kind of, you might say, dead water. That's what Victor Schauberger, a famous naturalist who studied water for many years in Austria, is quite famous, almost is a kind of folk hero in this. And he talked about dead water, which is like distilled water or stagnant water, and living water, which is water that's been moving around, like water that's been vortex or running around an actively flowing stream or something like that. And so reverse osmosis water is practically devoid of any of that stuff. In fact, in our laboratory, the water that comes into our lab, not the one we use for experiments, but the ordinary water in the sink, has been treated with reverse osmosis, and then ions, minerals, have been added to bring it back to a more natural state. So I wouldn't drink this stuff. I don't think that unless it has minerals in it. The minerals are great because around every mineral you've got EZ water because it's another hydrophilic surface. And so that's why natural springs, for example, which are rich with minerals, are going to be probably, most of them, good for your health because they're rich with EZ water.
Is there any difference between the type of mineral, like magnesium and EZ, or it's just you just have the general idea that the minerals in general create EZ?
Yeah, we haven't studied specifically which ones will create more, but actually it's a good idea to study this and find out. Could be done, and it would be important to do it.
But even but even if you do add minerals, it's still the water's still not moving around. It's still not having a vortex effect. I guess you could shake it up if you want, but
yeah, or you can buy. There are various vortex devices that you can use to vortex the water.
Right.
And I know people are beginning to seriously study vortex water because there's a lot of folklore on it that it appears to be good for your health. We actually have one installed in our house. There's a copper tube, and inside is a kind of helical twist. And the water that comes to us, the ordinary water that we use, has been vortexed. So
Oh, wow.
I think it's likely to be good for your health, but more studies need to be done. I keep saying that. I hesitate because as a scientist, unless we're really sure of something, I hesitate to say.
Right. What about, there is science in the past, since 2007, science has been doing a lot of research on adding hydrogen to water. Have you looked into that at all and how that perhaps, and the benefits of it. A recent article was published in Nature on adding hydrogen to the water, mice for drinking hydrogenated water, and the health benefits of that. Is there a interaction between adding hydrogen and easy water?
I'm not sure. I could imagine there might be. It reminds me of Patrick Flanagan, who is a well-known fellow who has been talking for many years about hydride. Produces this mineralized stuff, and you dissolve it in water. That many people have claimed really good health benefits from that. But we've not studied it in detail, so I can't give you any more information on it. But it's interesting. Yeah.
And what about the effect of pressure on easy?
Yeah, pressure is interesting. So pressure is interesting because easy water is more dense than H2O. So if you take H2O and you pressurize it, it should drive the reaction toward easy. And we did experiments on that, and the experiments are just, I think, published now or about to be published any day. That you put pressure, you have an experimental chamber that contains some EZ next to a hydrophilic surface, and you subject it to increased pressure, and you get more EZ. And this is what we expect theoretically, and what we get. So that brings you to the hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
I'm familiar with that, yeah.
Yeah. So you immerse your body into high pressure and high oxygen. It seems to be very effective, not only for treating wounds where it started, but actually for something like 25 or 30 different syndromes. And the question is, well, why? Why does it work? They don't know why it works. But we found experimentally that, as I said, if you increase the pressure, you get more EZ. And we found also that if you increase the oxygen, you get more EZ.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it makes sense because the easy water is H3O2, not H2O. And H3O2, if you think about it, has more oxygen relative to hydrogen than does H2O.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you put these two together and you get more easy, and this is absolutely wonderful for your health.
So they sell oxygen concentrators, and in Asia especially, it's known as something that improves cognitive function, mood. And I have one myself. I have a portable one, and I do find it's very, very good.
Really?
I like it. Yeah. Just the oxygen without the pressure. But but it's not.
According to our studies, that should increase EZ, and I think that could be the mechanism.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Well, I didn't either until you mentioned it.
That's fascinating.
It's an education for me today.
What about now? I know you were trying to study the effects of magnetism on EZ. Anything with that?
Oh, well, no, not really. So magnets are kind of mysterious. Magnets have very interesting effects, and in my view, nobody really understands how magnets work. Right. It's one of those mysteries like gravitation. There are theories about electron spin and such, but there are some things that don't quite fit that interpretation. There's a fellow in Japan who studied colloids, the effect of magnetic fields on colloids. He spent 10 years. Every time he did a study, he got a positive result, some effect. After 10 years, he stopped because he couldn't figure out what the mechanism was. Absolutely couldn't figure it out. And so he got tired of getting positive results, but not being able to figure out what the mechanism is. Well, we haven't figured it out either, but we have found that in some cases that the magnet can have an effect. We have some blobs of charge. I don't need to tell you how we do it, but we can, in water, we have a blob of negative charge and a blob of positive charge, and we put the magnet next to it, and if we put the North Pole there, the North Pole actually repels the positively charged blob and attracts the negatively charged blob, and we turn the magnet around, we get the opposite effect. So there's something going on there, and I'm reminded of levitating frogs and magnetic fields. You know about that?
No.
That was done by Andre Geim, and I invited Andre to. We organized an annual conference on the physics, chemistry, and biology of water. Now it's in Bulgaria. It's a really interesting meeting. So 4 or 5 years ago, I invited, because it was really cool. The guy was levitating frogs and magnetic fields, and he thought it had something to do with the water. So I invited him, and he told me, well, he's not going because he changed fields. So Andre Geim changed fields 2 months later, he got a Nobel Prize for graphene.
Oh,
so,
wow.
so I had a good reason for not coming.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, magnetic fields definitely have an effect on water. Nobody understands why or how. That would be a really wonderful thing to find out.
I'm curious about your opinion of cold exposure therapy. So, when you expose yourself to cold, your body, your mitochondria starts, it starts creating these UCPs, uncoupling proteins, and that basically the hydrogen ions cross the mitochondrial membrane. That creates infrared, and that kind of do you think that would create EZ in the cell as well?
Well, I mean, the first question is, how do the mitochondria know that you're exposed to cold?
That's a good question.
You see,
Yeah.
could, yeah. No, I mean, I think the gradient of temperature across your body interface, there's infrared that flows as a result of that, and the infrared that flows from the warm to the cold is actually what builds EZ water. So I it seems to me almost inevitable that somehow EZ water is involved. I mean, when you think about it, the body is, of course, very intricate, and there are lots of therapies that seem to affect everything in your body. So we mentioned the antioxidants, another aspirin. So aspirin is good for, reduces fever, reduces swelling, it reduces pain. It's good for your heart, even cancer. There was a study recently reported that women who have breast cancer, you divide them in two groups: one that take one aspirin a day, and one that they don't take aspirin. And the one that take aspirin, they survive 50% decrease in death rate among those. So you ask the question: well, how can one substance have so many different effects? And so, excuse me, a good candidate is water, because the only thing that's all over the place is water.
And aspirin creates, when you put that aspirin in EZ, it created EZ, right?
We measure that. Yeah. It creates, it can increase the EZ volume or amount by up to 3 times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, up to 3 times. And
Have you measured like toxins and things, like what effect fluoride or just toxins? I wonder if that uneases the water, maybe.
Yeah, we've been starting to do that, and we look, for example, at anesthetics, because anesthetics block function. You can do it in unicellular organisms, not just in nerves. And we studied 3 anesthetics, and all of them diminished EZ water. We've been studying glyphosate, in Roundup and such, and that also diminishes the size of the EZ. It's possible, we haven't studied, but it's possible that many poisons work that way. They just wipe out the EZ water, and then you can't function anymore, so it kills you. We've been a little reluctant to deal with some of these poisons, but we're getting into it.
That's fascinating. And how stable is the EZ? So let's say you created EZ. Let's say you create EZ with Nafion or whatever materials. Let's say you take that Nafion away. Does it uneasy? How stable is the EZ?
Yeah, again, that's not an easy question to answer. I can argue on both sides. So
Right.
we tried doing that. We take the Nafion away, and it looks like the EZ begins to diminish, and it diminishes and diminishes, and eventually fades away. On the other hand, we've investigated some waters that contain EZ sent to us by, for example, one guy studying water sat on my desk for 3 months before we tested it, and it was just full of EZ. You see,
wow. So it's
there's not a simple answer to that. We haven't uncovered. Yeah, I mean, in theory or in experiment, it can persist for a long time, but we don't know all the parameters yet that are responsible for this persistence. Would be good to find out. But I mean, you just think about it. The energy, once you got EZ, the energy that's required to sustain it or even amplify it is light. So you have light, including infrared, especially infrared. So if you got the thing standing in some place where there's ample infrared, and infrared is all over, you'd expect that energy is constantly being absorbed and should sustain this EZ. So it needs to be studied. Really important.
Interesting. Just, I mean, this is not a question, but there is a Dr. Hamblin from Harvard who studies the effects of infrared on cells and things like that. And one of his studies actually mentioned, he spoke about clothing that retains EZ. So what you see me wearing now is actually, not EZ, sorry, infrared, is actually it's like a ceramic lace clothing that prevents infrared from, it absorbs infrared and it kind of releases it back into your body.
And with health benefits?
They claim. I mean, it's, this stuff is studied on, maybe like they did a few studies on animals or something like that, but you know how it works. They're not doing.
Yeah, I mean, I know some
quality
clothing where some other stuff is embedded from Korea, where it gives out infrared as well, and it has absolute health benefits. So I'm quite interested to find out. Hamlin, Hamlin.
Hamblin.
Blin.
Yeah, he's a researcher at Harvard, and he studies low-level laser therapy. I actually use, various kinds of those devices. But in one of his research papers, he just mentioned, it was kind of a review, he mentioned using clothing that retains infrared.
Yeah.
But I'm sure he may be able to stimulate you, just because he's studying how there's other aspects of infrared also. They stimulate cytochrome C oxidase, stuff like that, and I wonder how that stuff.
Well, it's the same thing, Joe. I mean, the infrared builds the EZ water, and the EZ water is responsible. I mean, it drives everything. So cytochrome, mitochondria, it doesn't matter what. The water is deeply involved in everything that sits in your body. You see, so that could be the common mediator, and infrared should be great for that. So it doesn't surprise me about these studies wearing clothing that generates a lot of infrared. It could be that
it doesn't generate it; it just absorbs it. The infrared that you're constantly releasing from your body.
Oh, absorb it from your body.
From your body, yeah, and it keeps it in like it absorbs it and then it gives it back.
So you haven't gained anything, or you're just preventing.
In some way, you could say maybe like you're kind of also blocking the infrared from the environment. I guess that's you could look at it in two different ways, but I think it absorbs it. And
well, another possibility is that sometimes materials absorb visible light and then re-radiate in the infrared region, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's what this stuff does. Melanin is something that might do it. Melanin's black, and it absorbs all wavelengths, all visible wavelengths, but it generates in the infrared. See, so it could be that that's the mechanism, that you wear the clothing, it absorbs light from outside, and it re-radiates in the infrared wavelength region, and then your body gets that infrared which it needs to build EZ water. I'm not sure, but that's one idea.
It didn't seem like he was sure. He was just giving hypothesis out.
Oh, yeah.
It's just interesting if you spoke to him and you compared your work, and that would be something interesting for you. Why does EZ have such a dramatic role in cell physiology?
Your cell is full of proteins. The proteins are the workers inside the cell. They do everything that the cell is designed to do. So, for example, in a muscle cell, the proteins undergo some kind of change of configuration, and that makes your muscles contract. Okay, but these proteins are designed by nature to work in a milieu that has EZ water. So here's a protein here, and it's surrounded by EZ water, and it does its thing with the water around it. If you don't have the water, it faces a different environment. It can't do its thing. It can't fold or do what. And so you need to restore the water to put it back in its pristine state, and that's why full hydration is extremely important. When people get gray hair, they tend to be dehydrated. And we don't even notice the dehydration. We're just almost perpetually dehydrated. So drinking a lot of water is really important. There was a famous book by an Iranian doctor, and we call him Batman because his name is too long to pronounce, but it starts with Batman. It's Batmangalesh. And the book is entitled, "You're Not Sick, You're Thirsty." You see, and you can get the book on Amazon. It's cheap, and it's really interesting. And this guy was, when the Shah of Iran was deposed, he was a supporter of the Shah, and he was thrown into prison. And it was him and all the other political prisoners. And since he was a physician, he was required to take care of the other prisoners, and he had nothing at his disposal, no antibiotics, etc. So he told them to drink more water, and so many of them got cured just by drinking a real lot of water. That he when he got out of prison, he continued his research and he wrote that book. And it's an amazing book describing how it doesn't matter whether it's diabetes or heart problems or kidney problems, just drink a lot of water. And I think we might refine that now to drink a lot of water, but particularly, good water. And we're trying to figure out exactly what good water is. I think water that contains EZ is likely to be a good water. But the hydration is totally important for everything.
Are you familiar with EMFs and stuff like that at all? Or
yeah.
You are. I mean, that's a question that Dr. Cruz speaks about a lot, and kind of like I'm wondering how that relates to EZ, if at all, or maybe you have any other opinion on it. So there's like, let's say, you never exposed maybe cell phone radiation to EZ water, or
well, we've never done specific studies on that, but I can tell you in general that electromagnetic fields are something to be concerned about. And so we did an experiment. This is kind of an anecdote. I had a Chinese student in the laboratory. We had a chamber with water and these tiny little particles, microspheres. And we took the chamber and we put two electrodes, one on one side, one on the other. One was positive, one was negative. And we expected that the microspheres would migrate as soon as we turned on the voltage to either one electrode or the other. We weren't sure which one, but it had to go to the negative or the positive. So she comes in and she says, well, it didn't go to either one, it went to the side. I said, this is impossible. How could it go to the side? I said, check your experiment. So she came back and she reported that right next to her computer was her experiment was a computer. And when she unplugged the computer, then it did what we expected. She turns on the computer and they all move toward the computer.
Oh, huh.
So, this is the sort of thing, these little particles are not so different from particles, molecules that you have inside your body, and they definitely respond. This is a sort of obvious case. But also, another colleague who measures noise in electronic circuits told me that the noise level over the past 10 years, as background noise you can't get rid of, has increased 10 times over the past 10 years. So all of the stuff that's going around with cell phones and wireless communication is really changing the environment enormously. A colleague who has in our university who has studied cell phones and the effect of that kind of radiation on biological tissues, he told me that in 10 years, cell phones will be in the same category as cigarettes.
Wow.
So we haven't studied it ourselves, but there's a lot of concern among people who are seriously thinking about this kind of thing.
That's interesting because you have these so-called science-based skeptics, so-called, who, one of them says, oh, there's like no chance that cell phones are harmful. It's pretty much impossible. So I think these people, they in levels of insufficient information, they kind of just assume what the general population assumes. Oh, it's probably, it's nothing.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you haven't looked at the evidence, then it's pretty easy to say, well, it can't be. It's like, there was who was it? It was a famous scientist, a famous physical chemist who declared that planes will never fly. It's impossible, And then a few years later, the Wright brothers came. So there are lots of pronouncements about what can't be, and then you find evidence that it can be.
Right. What do you think of? This is an area of interest, actually. So for the longest time, I actually did not believe in, and I don't have a position on it, but I didn't believe in homeopathy, and that's because the researchers who were studying it, as you know, they were discredited. I'm wondering if your work has any insights on that. Maybe because the argument is that there's no active molecules within these homeopathic remedies. I'm wondering if maybe the process by which it goes through, becomes a homeopathic remedy, the shaking, things like that, or perhaps maybe you know something about that.
Yeah.
What your opinion is on
Yeah.
homeopathy?
Yeah, I do know something about it because people come to our conference each year, and some of them are studying high delusions and what happens during delusion. And let me preface it by saying that you're referring to Jacques Benveniste,
Yeah, I forgot his
was
name. Yeah.
yeah, he was discredited. His results have been confirmed again and again by so many different people that at this conference it's not even considered a question anymore. It's true. It's simply
Wow.
true. That's the first thing. In fact, among many people, he's become a hero because he was crucified by what he did. Jacques Benveniste was actually a very prominent French immunologist. Some of his discoveries appear in every textbook. And someone came to him and said, the experiment you're doing, he was doing some experiments on cells. He'd pour some antibody on the cells and get some response. So someone came and told him, I can dilute it and dilute it and dilute it and get the same result. He said, impossible. But he said, being an open-minded guy, okay, I got a laboratory of 50 people, sit in the corner, do your stuff. And pretty soon the whole laboratory was fixated on this guy and his experiments because he could get the same result. And so finally, after Nature refused to publish their paper, the editor called him and made a deal. And the deal was that we'll publish it, but we have to send a committee of peers to look over your shoulder, and then we'll report back to our readers. So the peers came a month later, and the peers consisted of the editor of Nature himself, who was not a biologist. This is sort of biological experiment. Randy, the amazing Randy, a magician, and a fraud buster from the National Institutes of Health. And the first couple of days, the technician did the experiment, repeated the experiment, and got the actual result. And when one of the committee repeated it the next day, they couldn't get that result. And so they concluded that, since they couldn't get the result, but the French could get the result, that it must be a trick, a delusion. And so this guy lost his career after that. But as I said,
so what do you think happened there?
Okay. Well, I think there's a political issue involved in this because in their paper they said that we didn't get the result 100% of the time. However, we got it pretty often, or very often, enough to be clearly statistically significant, way beyond any question of significance. So the fact that 1 out of 3 times it didn't work, is not exactly a reason to say that the whole thing is nonsense. But I mean, the proof is in the pudding, and so many people have repeated the experiment. So let me just go back to the issue of high dilution and what happens. This is now being studied by several groups, and especially a world-class chemist who used to be the president or the rector of Kazan University in Russia, which is the 3rd-ranked university in all of Russia, and he was head of a chemical institute. And this is. So he's studying what happens when you dilute. And it turns out that what we all expect doesn't happen. We expect that if you have molecule A inside of water and you dilute it 10 times, you have 1/10 of molecule A. And for the first few dilutions, that does happen. When you get to the 5th or 6th or 7th, then clusters begin forming. And these clusters, in the next dilution, they grow and they grow and they grow. And the next dilution, they diminish in size and so on with each dilution. And then after many more dilutions, it begins to grow again. And so it's a kind of periodic thing, the same as what Benveniste found. And so most people will discredit homeopathy because it's built on high dilution, and everybody thinks, well, you just eliminate the molecules as you dilute. That doesn't happen. You see, it's not exactly. And it turns out that the shaking is absolutely critical, and it turns out that if you block the electromagnetic energy from the environment, light, so to speak, it doesn't happen. Get a completely different result. So the energy is important, and the shaking is important. So the process is much different from what we all think, and the reason that many people who are not even familiar with it will discredit it, just like reflex. It doesn't happen that way, and I think if one is serious about finding out what happens, one has to delve into the research and see what people are finding rather than reflexively discrediting it because it doesn't seem reasonable. I've seen also, in terms of efficacy, I'm no expert on this, but I know that I've seen reports by veterinarians who use it all the time and get positive results, and the horses keep coming back. So anyway, I think that any serious scientist, I know there are skeptics who will reflexively reject it. Any serious scientist will have to look deeply into the research that's being done, and if they can find some problems with the research, that's fine. But if they can't, then to be fair and honest about it, you need to look into that before making a decision.
That's I completely agree there. Now I'm curious about a whole bunch of. Have you studied the effects of ozone? Ozone is a negative. It's a negative molecule. Have you studied ozone, NEZ?
No, we haven't done that.
You
No.
haven't done that. Colloidal silver, you didn't. But
Yeah, well, a lot of people are using colloidal silver for health benefits, and I suspect that what's going on is that those colloids, like other colloids, form EZ around each particle of silver, and that maybe is the reason for the touted health benefits of colloidal silver.
Mm-hmm. And what? Okay, yeah, that's interesting. What about heavy metals and EZ, like lead, mercury, cadmium? You don't know about that?
We need to do that, and I suspect. I don't know it, but I suspect that they'll absolutely wipe out the EZ. Yeah, you're actually influencing me and triggering a lot of experiments that really need to be done, and it's just that we can't do every experiment that we think of, but that's really important.
Sugar and EZ, because
sugar builds easy.
It builds easy. That okay.
Yeah, this is a real issue. This is one I do want to remark on because if you take sugar and you add water, you get a slurry. You get a paste. If you got sugar in your blood,
right,
you're gonna get a paste. You don't want a paste in your blood. You don't want ketchup. You want free flowing blood. And I think that the problem in diabetes and high blood sugar is that the blood is so thick and so viscous that it can't actually flow to the peripheral tissues. And then, if it doesn't flow, your tissue becomes dead, and you may lose a retina or lose a foot or something like that. That's a really serious issue.
That's really interesting. What do you now? Here's a random one.
I'll give you a random answer then.
I actually put infrared through glass container. The infrared, to my knowledge, goes through glass, right?
No, the glass will block a lot of it.
It will block a lot of the infrared. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a famous experiment with that. Random question, random response. So Alexander Gurevich in Russia, he was the pioneer in a lot of things, including signaling between different plants. So he took onion plants, and the roots are down. Maybe you know this experiment, and they're under the roots. The cells in the roots are undergoing mitosis. They're dividing, and if you take a plant from here or a plant from there, the rates of mitosis will be different. But if you put them near each other, they synchronize. It's like sometimes women's menstrual cycles, they synchronize. And the plants did the same thing. When you put them near one another, the mitoses of the two plants were synchronized. And then he tried to see what kind of signal was going between them. So he put glass, and then he put quartz, and glass is not doesn't pass UV and also blocks a lot of the infrared. So he actually concluded, because he put quartz there and quartz passes UV, he said the signal probably is in the ultraviolet. He was a pioneer in communication between entities, and including water. The communication between water is a big deal right now. A lot of people are beginning to study information content in water and signaling. And he was the pioneer to do it. But anyway, just to answer your question.
Interesting. That is fascinating stuff. What about microwaving in Easy? There is some debate about, is microwaving unhealthy. I haven't even looked into it, so I don't know. But I wonder what effect that has on the water on water, and also the Easy in food.
Yeah, well, I mean that's another good question that we haven't gotten to. We'd like to get to it, but can't study everything. I mean, you'd expect,
Right.
of course, that what it's doing is flipping water molecules around, and we expect that's going to happen. And you'd expect it to destroy any kind of structure. What happens after you remove the microwave is not so clear, whether the structure comes back or remains destroyed. It's on the list.
It's on the list. Okay, that's great.
You're full of good questions. Maybe you want to come to my laboratory and do some work.
Okay, what about pH in Easy?
Yeah, well, yeah. So we have studied that. So it turns out, I mentioned to you that as EZ grows and has negative charge, the region beyond that is just ordinary water, and it's full of protons. For every electron that grows in the EZ, you get a proton in the water. Okay,
Yeah.
So it turns out we studied that. We wanted to know when those protons build up, what effect do they have on the growing EZ? Mm-hmm. It turns out when you get too many protons, the EZ doesn't grow anymore, so it's kind of self-limiting. So you can never get...
What pH is that at?
Well, we studied the effect of pH on the size, and if I remember correctly, when the pH goes down to around 3 or so, or 4 or 3 roughly, then it begins to inhibit the growth of the EZ. The same thing happens also at very high pHs. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, but that would suggest that maybe alkalinization of water is maybe not that beneficial, because it's taking it from, normally it's at what, 7 anyway, about. So
well, it doesn't usually. It's pretty rare to have real 7.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it's around 7.
But it wouldn't make a difference if it was 6 or 7 or 8, because you're saying that the 3 is the threshold. Or about
that's not exactly a standard I would stick by, but we found in a study that we did that when pH drops to roughly between 3 and 4, it begins to inhibit the EZ. When you go down even lower, it inhibits it even more, so it doesn't grow anymore. Mm-hmm. I think that kind of makes sense because. Yeah, go ahead.
What about a copper sheet that's not touching the EZ, that's under, like let's say you have a container of water and then you have a copper sheet under. Would that affect the EZ at all?
We haven't done that, but why would you think it would?
Actually, just because this Dr. Cruz mentioned putting a copper plate under your water, or something, or in Ayurvedic medicine, there's the effects of having copper utensils has been around, the health benefits, and they have studied it actually. So when they store water in copper, this is directly on copper, so it's a little it's a little bit different, but it kills bacteria. Like bacteria can't really grow when it's in a copper vessel.
Oh, that's really interesting.
I bought a lot of these copper vessels. I even have a copper cup here. Yeah, it's just interesting. I'm wondering how that. When I was reading the studies, they didn't even know how it was working. They're just like, we just see that it's happening, and they were trying to theorize. And I was thinking that maybe it's the they didn't mention it, but the copper ions are released from these copper vessels. Maybe they're creating EZ. They're saying that the copper is directly antimicrobial. I wonder.
I mean, it's really interesting that you mention this because we have a couple of papers that deal with metals and what happens on metals. And to our surprise, we found that next to some of the metals, including copper and aluminum, and there was another one, I forget which one, EZ grows. And the EZ is actually the opposite of what I mentioned to you is the normal case where the EZ is negative. In this case, it's positive. And beyond that, there are negative OH. Beyond the EZ, there are negative OHs. So I could imagine that anything that wants to live right next to copper, any microbes or such, would have difficulty because of the positive charges that are produced in this EZ. So they wouldn't be able to survive in it. I suspect that could be related to the mechanism. It's interesting to know that. I didn't know the fact that you just mentioned about copper.
Yeah,
That
it's
could be. Yeah, you could
copper
be
and
right.
silver. They use that, but copper is really the only thing that's affordable now. So but they've been using that in Ayurvedic medicine for thousands of years.
They knew a lot then, didn't
Yeah.
they?
You
Yeah.
know what? It was just trial and error, I guess. They just said they just saw associations. Hey, when people drink through copper, something changed. It's probably what happened. But
Oh
and
yeah,
you
well
know
that's very
and
interesting. I mean, they taught the Chinese, and then there's so much from the Chinese that that has come out. We tend to forget those. We assume that those cultures, they didn't know what they were talking about. Now modern medicine and modern science knows everything, and
right.
therefore let's discard all of these traditions that have proved themselves again and again because there's no mechanism that we can understand. Therefore, they can't work.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, what about using Nafion straws maybe, or putting Nafion bowls in your water? I mean, I don't think that's not on the market, but I'm just curious. Since Nafion is the material that creates the most easy,
Well, we don't
theoretically,
know. We don't know that it's the material that creates the most easy.
the
For
one that you
example,
studied.
well, we studied it a lot because it's easy to use. But chia seed, for example, we started studying chia. You know
Oh yeah,
about
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Cool.
So chia has been used for I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of years for athletes and in Latin America who would had to run long distances. They'd keep hydrated and full of energy. So we decided to study chia, and we found a tremendous EZ next to each chia seed. And so I can kind of understand why
Interesting.
it works so well. Chia might actually be, it's hard to compare because it's in the shape of a seed instead of the shape of a flat piece, and that might be even better.
Wow.
I don't know, but
That's very interesting. Have you ever studied uh, the effects of hormones? Like, let's say cortisol would be a big hormone. Dr. Kruse actually has a theory that cortisol expands the water and in your mitochondria, and that creates less of an electron flow because as the less of an electric and magnetic flow in your cells. I'm curious if that has anything to do with easy.
well, as I said, I suspect many of these have to do with. We studied probiotics, for example. We know why
Mm.
are probiotics. So students just produced really beautiful results and showing that over a wide dose range, the EZ is expanded by about 50% by the
Oh wow.
probiotic. Yeah. So, and I suspect that many of these things operate the same way. We just begun studying them, and cortisol would certainly be one that we would be interested in, among many others.
So that's
Sure.
interesting with the probiotics because we're constantly absorbing water from our guts, and the probiotics in our gut. If we have enough probiotics, that would create more easy. I never. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's helpful for us.
That's fascinating. Do we know what percentage of the body, or do you have any kind of estimate what percentage of the water in the body is easy water, or you're not sure?
Well, it's hard to know exactly. As I said, I think most of the water inside the cell is easy. However, there are flows in the cell. Whenever you have flow, you probably don't have easy water. So a certain percentage of the water that's in the cell and is flowing from point A to point B is probably not easy water. I think the more the more non-easy, the more protons you have, the less healthier you are because you need this negative charge to do. It gives you energy, and you need it to survive. So cells, for example, that are sick, like for example, pathological cancer cells, people have measured the electrical potential. Typical standard cells, the negative potential is like minus 80 or minus 90 millivolts, but these are 10 or 15 millivolts, and so
Oh
are
wow.
various other pathological cells. And the reason they're not so negative, I think, is because they're deficient in easy water, because the negativity comes from the easy water. So you don't have enough easy water, you're not so negative. You want to rebuild it. And when you build up the water back to its natural state, then you get more negativity in the cell. And that's what you need to be healthy. So you want to get rid of all that positively charged water. And as I mentioned earlier, your cells or your body's equipped to do that.
That's fascinating. I wonder what the effect of fluoride is, because 65% of America drinks fluoride in their water, and They're operating from there's no way to know all the effects that fluoride has in the body, and they just add it in your water. I'm curious if you know anything with, fluoride in Easy.
Uh, I'm putting this down on my list because we haven't studied fluoride, but my colleagues who have studied fluoride discuss it as a poison, and
Right.
we should test
It
to
seems.
see, because I think so many things operate on the basis of the central mechanism of structuring the water or destructuring the water. So fluoride should be high on our list of what to study. We do know that various salts. We haven't studied fluoride, but we've studied chloride, for example, various sodium chloride, potassium chloride, and the more you put in, the more structure that you lose. And so it'd be interesting to study fluoride instead of chloride. At the time, we never thought of it. We did those studies about 10 years ago or 8 years ago. It'd be interesting to see if fluoride has a more powerful negative effect on any of those. That would
That
be.
that would be a very interesting thing.
Yeah, we need
Yeah.
to do it.
Uh, Now, here's a random one. Human relations, and when you get into human contact, let's say cuddling, that can transfer infrared. Have you ever thought about that, or is that something that's just a wacky idea, or because the body is loaded with infrared and you're constantly releasing it? I wonder if that has any effect.
Yeah, it must have an effect. I never, never thought about cuddling, but certainly it should, because you're losing infrared, you're radiating infrared to the environment, and so if you protect that against that loss, then yeah, I mean you should retain more infrared and thereby retain the structuring inside your cell. So this is a really intriguing idea as to how to preserve your easy water. Just cuddle.
Yeah, I thought that was just one of my cockamamie ideas.
No,
But
no, it's
anyway,
interesting.
when somebody has a static charge, somebody touches an object and they get shocked. What do you think that has to do with?
Well, it has to do with building up a potential difference. Whenever you build up enough charge, if the voltage is high enough, you get a discharge, just like lightning. So
Does that have any interaction with EZ or anything like that, or maybe the electric?
Yeah, I think. Well, sure. You are negatively charged normally, because all your cells are negatively charged, and if you make a measurement, which we've done, you can measure that you're like 100 millivolts or so negative compared to the stick it in the earth. You have this, and but if the wind, this happens often. For example, in the winter when it's dry and the wind is blowing, you just take a key and hold it, a metal key, and touch the car, and you get a big shock. So when the wind is blowing and it's dry, you get charged just by the very mechanism I'm talking about. You build negative charge, and if you touch something that is grounded, you get a discharge. So it's called static electricity, but it's really important because charges can exert huge forces and can drive many things.
Some people get shocked and some people don't. I'm wondering if that has anything to do with their how much charge they have in the body. If that's a good sign, a bad sign, or no sign.
Well, I don't think it's the charge in your body that does it. Although you do have charge, because then everybody would be getting shocks every time they touched. So it's not that. But I think I remember growing up as a kid, it would often happen that we get shocked. It was usually the winter when it was dry and not much conductivity for the charges to leak away or leak off. And it would often happen when the wind is blowing. And now I understand that when the wind is blowing, we get negatively charged. Everything gets negatively charged in the wind or the breeze. This is actually really important, I think, for bird flying. We think that flying of birds has everything to do with the wings flapping and pushing the air back. And I think it has more to do, that certainly is one, but I think the fact that the Earth is negative and the flying bird gains negative charge, the repulsion of the bird from the Earth is a very important factor in keeping the birds aloft. And,
that's very interesting. What do you think of if the scientist, if you've heard of him, Rupert Sheldrake? I'm curious because he's widely ostracized. I don't necessarily believe in his ideas. I don't, I'm very skeptical. I'm just curious if, he's just a widely. He used to be a top scientist in his field studying plant biology and how the systems flow. So, in some way that could, relate to areas that you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he's got a lot of wacky ideas. But I'm curious if what your take is.
Well, yeah, we were over at Rupert's home for dinner last year in London, and we kind of started a collaboration, but we never got too far. I have a different point of view about that. Rupert studies science that falls between the cracks,
Right.
and he's maybe the world's major or best proponent of that sort of thing. And his studies that I've seen are absolutely objective. It's just that his findings don't necessarily agree with what people would like to believe. So he studies things like, well, you may know about some of this, like do your pets know when you're coming home from work? And in accepted conventional science, nobody would ever study that because it seems to be a ridiculous question. But the evidence that he produced showed definitely that is the case. And a lot of people sort of know that their pets know when they're coming home. We have no mechanism for understanding that. And even he has a theory of so-called morphic resonance, and he doesn't know. He's just suggesting there's some kind of energy out there. Any event that's ever happened, there's the information is lingering. So we like to dismiss it because we haven't a clue, and he doesn't either exactly about how it works. But that's what advances science. When we do science that dots the I's and crosses the T's, we don't make major advances. But when we delve into areas that are unknown, and he has the courage to produce these, then we begin to make some progress. So, he's also studied, sometimes you think someone's staring at you, and look around, and oh yeah, sure enough. So he studies that too. But conventional science won't accept these kinds of studies because
there's no accepted mechanism.
There's no accepted mechanism.
So you think, have you ever thought of a mechanism, or are you just saying it's something we need to study? Is that your position?
Yeah, I don't know of a mechanism, but it's something we need to study. Those are the very things that we need to study most, the things that we don't understand at all. We need to study them most, not least, you see. And he has the courage to pursue this stuff, and I really admire him for that. He has impeccable credentials from Cambridge, and he was teaching at Harvard for a while, but he's been ostracized by science. I suppose if we still had the stake, and he would be burned at the stake.
I hear that. Now, what are some big unanswered questions in your work that you're actively trying to figure out?
Yeah, so the work is actually pressed on to thinking about charges. I've been so deeply interested in what happens in water. It turns out that charge is right at the basis of so many things. And so I've begun thinking about charge and what role it might have in other questions. For example, so questions that are unanswered. What's gravitation all about? You say, you don't know the answer, and physicists don't know the answer, but how could that be that we don't know the answer to the most familiar phenomenon? We throw a ball and it drops. So what's going on? We don't understand what inertia is. Why do you throw something? Why does it keep going? We don't know what turns the Earth. The Earth spins on its own axis. And so you could say, well, God gave it a spin to start with, or something gave it a spin. It just keeps going because of the Wizard of Oz, But usually, when things spin, there's got to be some energy that keeps them spinning. So where does this energy come from? Weather. The weather forecaster says 50% chance of rain tomorrow. Well, why 50%? Why can't he get it better, or she get it better than 50%? Is something wrong? If you think about the weather, the forecasters talk about pressure and temperature. You hear almost nothing else but pressure and temperature. Well, during a thunderstorm, you look up and you see flashes of lightning. So charges are really important. And I think charges are much, much more important than the physicists who studied weather actually think. So this is another extension of the work on water. What makes weather? How is it that a cloud that's up there, maybe you haven't thought about that, little droplets of water, but water is heavier than air, should be pulled by gravity. How come it doesn't rain all the time? Every time there's a cloud, how come the cloud doesn't simply descend and pour water over your head? And these are the kinds of questions that arise that I've been thinking very deeply about and trying to understand in terms of charges. So there's a future.
That's that's amazing that you're doing this work. What topics did you decide not to include in the book?
I probably didn't put too much in on information. At the time.
Oh, water info. That's a toxic subject.
If you put stuff like that in, you get discounted immediately. However,
Blackwatch and things like that.
Yeah, but at our conference, annual conference, many people talk about, and many people have clear evidence that there's information content. I think the information content, now that we learn that the EZ has a specific structure, it's almost like a solid. In fact, an Italian group has recently solidified EZ water at room temperature. You can pick it up and feel it. You see, so wow. This is something, and it's possible since this has a regular three-dimensional structure. It has the capacity to store information. This is just like a computer memory.
Have you looked into what kind of when you say information, there's the suggestion that there's different kinds of information. It's not when you talk about EZ, it's just okay. There's the water separates charge. That's one thing. When you talk about information, is that something else, or
yeah, it's something within the. See, I discussed a generic EZ structure. Okay?
Right, exactly.
The idea, but the information is contained in the variants of that generic structure. So, for example, this is a three-dimensional array of hydrogens and oxygens forming this solid-like or solid material. So you take one of those oxygens, it's like one point in a computer memory. It could be a 0 or a 1. You can take an oxygen, it can have, it could be -2, -1, 0, even +1 and +2. It has 5 different possible states, even more than the 2 that you get in like silicon dioxide in a computer memory. So there's vast capacity to store information within the EZ. How that might work is not so clear, but
how many permutation, how many combinations do you think that there might be? Just 5, like you mentioned, or millions, or what?
If you have all those oxidation states, then you're going to have, I didn't do the arithmetic, but you can imagine, instead of having a 0 and a 1 in a particular location, as is in everyone's digital computer, if you can have a -2, -1, 0, +1, +2, you got 5 options instead of 2. And that's amazing. I don't know, that's theoretical.
Right.
Whether it's realized or not is not so clear, but it is clear that people's experiments have shown that the water contains information, and the most interesting experiment in that is the one by Luc Montagnier. Maybe you know it. Who won the Nobel Prize for HIV, for identifying HIV, and he began studying water. And he's been studying water and coming to our meeting each year, and he's able to take information from DNA, store it in water. And using that water, no DNA at all, just the water, he's able to create new DNA that has the same sequence as the original DNA.
Oh, wow.
So this is really astounding. And I was told by somebody who went to where he presented this in Lindau, which is annually many Nobel laureates get together and share their views and rub shoulders with some of the younger students who are talented and get the option to, rub shoulders with them, that Luc presented this material over there, and he was basically ridiculed by all the other Nobel laureates who said, this is impossible, this is too way out for us even to think about it. So it's very, very controversial. But other people have simpler experiments and finding results that absolutely clearly show that the water can not only contain the information, but can radiate the information to other containers of water that are not in contact with them. So this sounds way out and on the fringe, but the evidence is coming again and again and becoming clear.
That's fascinating. Now, what do you think about the Earth's magnetic field, the Earth's magnetic and electric field? How they give you electrons? Would that have any effect on the EZ when you know you're I guess they call it grounding and things like that?
Yeah. So
And let's say you were wearing this a second part. Let's say you were wearing sneakers on the ground. Is that something that would block the Earth's electric field from
yeah. So this is actually 5 years ago, 6 years ago. This was completely new to me. I as an electrical engineer to start with, when you ground something, it's zero potential. I could never imagine in my wildest dream that that's not true. Well, it turns out it's not true. The Earth has net negative charge, and came as a shock to me as it comes to many other people. But the evidence is absolutely clear. Even appears in Richard Feynman's lectures that the Earth is negative, the ionosphere is positive. You have an electric field of 100 volts per meter between the two, and so your nose is like 200. If you're standing up, 200 volts positive compared to your toes. And not many people know that. In Russia, they all know it. And in the U.S., almost nobody knows it for some weird reason. So the Earth is negative. It means if you connect yourself to this rich supply of electrons, you need electrons. And so when you connect yourself, the electrons flow from the Earth into your body. So if you take off your sneakers and you walk on the beach, especially a damp beach because the conductivity is pretty good, you're going to get electrons from the Earth that flow into your body. And as a result of those electrons, you get negative charge, and you need the negative charge, and that's why earthing or grounding is good for your health. And various people have know this and use it and benefit from it. You can get it, for example, commercially, you can buy a sheet you put on your bed, and maybe you know about that.
Yeah, you stick it into those. I'm actually on one of them right now.
Oh, yeah. How does it feel?
It doesn't feel like anything. It's just, you know what? I personally don't notice a difference from it, but I guess I bought it to experiment with, and
you have clothing that
it's
you
hard
wear?
to know sometimes.
Is there clothing between the sheet?
There's the silver embedded clothing. So I actually also bought. I'm doing experiments, like I do some self experiments. I bought a lot of silver embedded clothing, sheets, and things like that. Some of that, a lot of that mainly was to to block out EMFs. I wanted to see if I noticed the difference. I'm still doing experiments, so I'm not sure, but basically, yeah, there's a whole industry of silver laced clothing that, and I tested it with RF meters and tri-field meters, and it does block out the EMFs.
Yeah. Okay.
So
yeah.
I
remember an experience as a kid, and then of course I have no idea. Growing up in New York and Brooklyn and Brighton Beach, and getting buried as a kid in the sand, except my head was sticking out. And somehow I so distinctly remember that once buried, I didn't want to get unburied. The feeling was so good, was so positive. So joyous, and I simply didn't want to. And now I realize finally what was going on, that my body was basically surrounded by this huge source of negative charge, and it just pervaded, I guess, it pervaded my body. And so with all those electrons, everything in my body, not just the muscles and the nerves and whatever, but my brain too, was receiving this stuff and was making me feel happy, content, pleasured.
Now, what do you think of? This was just a thought that popped in my mind. That we don't really understand the full effects of the hair on your body, how they help you or whatever, or what the purpose is so much. There's keeping your body, the temperature of your body stable. That's one thing. But I'm curious. Hair can, I believe, store electric charges. I'm wondering if that has something to do maybe with the the electric potential in your body or things like that.
Well, I'm thinking about what you said, because this is a very interesting concept. So birds, for example, everything if you blow air on anything, doesn't matter what, like your hair, you don't have too much of it on your head right
So
now,
I
but
just shaved it off. Yeah.
you
Okay.
shave it off, yeah. But
To do experiments in the name of science.
it's really important. You got to sacrifice
Yeah.
for science. Okay, so my wife does is use a hair dryer, and the hair is fluffy after you use the hair dryer, and because the air has blown on the hair and it confers negative charge, and the hairs repel each other, so it gets fluffy. It turns out it's negative charge, and the same thing occurs with the hair on your body. And I never thought of this until you mentioned, but if you expose that hair to air that's blowing on it, it builds negative charge, and you need negative charge. So it's not a
Yeah.
surprise.
It's just what was that? The last thing?
No, it's not a surprise.
It's not a surprise. Yeah, I'm just wondering because I was always trying to figure why do we have hair? I mean, like, okay, to block out the sun maybe, but I just feel like maybe it could have to do with getting keeping electric charge. Maybe, who knows?
Well, I think that's a really good idea. So birds, for example, one of the questions you have to ask is why do I see from my home, just look out over Lake Washington, the birds are meandering all the time. They're flying. It seems like useless because they're not eating. They're just sort of high up. They can't really detect worms or whatever. They're just flying around. Why do they fly around? And it was my friend from Ecuador who who mentioned this to me. They're getting negative charge because their wings and their body is flying in the air, and that confers negative charge. And negative charge feels good, so it may be to the bird like an afternoon stroll in the woods that we might take.
Wow.
We do it to feel good. And I don't think anybody's ever thought of that, but the feathers are built of keratin, just like your hair and my hair, and those hairs on our arms and maybe even this hair too. Same sort of thing. It could really help us feel better.
Interesting.
So getting bald is not a good idea.
Now you have an Institute of Venture Science. You want to just briefly explain, what that's about and why people should, donate to it?
Yeah. So the Institute for Venture Science is, by the way, URL is ivsci, S-C-I, ivsci.org. The problem, it's designed to solve a problem. It's actually designed to fund promising ideas that challenge conventional science. So you might say, well, why do we need that? And anybody who deals with the funding of science these days knows that anybody with an unconventional idea has vanishingly small chance of getting financial support to pursue that idea. The way the system is set up right now is that, if you submit a proposal, if you discover that the Earth looks round and everybody around you knows it's flat, and you apply to a granting agency, your chances of getting funded are almost zero, because what the granting agency does is they find the experts on the shape of the Earth to review your radical proposal. And who are the experts? They're the flat Earth people, so you won't get anywhere. Many scientists know that this is true. Even the well-funded scientists know that if you have an unconventional idea, forget it. And so these are the ideas that need to get support, to get funded, because if we don't pursue them, then nothing happens. So you may ask yourself, in the past 30 or 40 years, can I name a single scientific breakthrough, not technological, not the internet or smartphone, but a fundamental scientific discovery that's revolutionized the world? Like, for example, 60 years ago, the structure of DNA, the structure of the atom, relativity, photoelectric. Well, these are old. Something in the past 30 years or 40 years that's so fundamental that it's changed the world. It's really hard to think. Maybe you can think of one or two. There aren't many of them. The reason there aren't many is that the granting systems are set up in such a way that they don't encourage this kind of original thinking. This is keeping us back. The world is going downhill. We have so many problems to solve. And many of the problems are actually socio-political, but some of them are scientific. We need science to move. So this institute is designed to make sure that science moves. We're going to fund unconventional ideas. We're going to vet them very carefully. So these are not, wacko ideas. These are promising ideas that will be thoroughly vetted. And originally I thought of that this should be supported by the government. And when President Obama was elected the first time, I had great hopes, but
Messiah.
it was received with a thud. We got a very nice thank you. The envelope was really nice. It was heavy linen. It said from President Obama, the White House, Pennsylvania Avenue, whatever. And I showed this to all my relatives, and they were really impressed. But it was thank you very much for your interesting idea. We'll consider it. And then I realized that science is not national; it's international. Of course, it should have been obvious. And also, private funding is the way to go, because governments they have so much inertia that they can't do it. There are many people out there who have made a lot of money and who want to do something to return to society, and there are actually quite a few of those people. And then the idea is to try to attract some of those people to our institute, to some people who feel they really do want to return something to society. This is, I think, a fairly noble effort. We really want to do something to bring science back to what it should be, and what has turned out to be not so productive in the sense that I'm talking about. Lots of papers, but not much imagination.
When I make a lot of money, that institute will get all of the donations that I give, hopefully.
I'll attach your signature to that comment.
So I do, any listeners, if you do have money and you want to donate it, this is probably one of the best places to give it to. And because, when you invest in that fundamental science, that is what has the biggest ramifications on benefiting the world, really.
Yeah, thank you for that plug.
I would, and the Dr. Pollack has written The Fourth Phase of Water. I would definitely recommend that everybody buy that book. It's an amazing book. Thank you so much for this interview, and I'm going to keep tabs on I'm going to read all your books that you publish.
Wow, I'm impressed. I'll become rich too.
So thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Goodbye.
Just to recap and expand on some interesting ideas in this podcast. If you have enough easy water, it should theoretically help combat infections, and it seems like there's a few mechanisms for that. First, it may increase blood flow, which helps transport products that help combat infections, which includes oxygen. Second, it may increase lymphatic flow, which is essentially the highway for your immune system. Third, the negative charge in your body is directly antimicrobial. I'll give you an example of this. The level of negative charge, or oxidation reduction potential, to use a fancy term for it, abbreviated as ORP, can be used for water system monitoring to measure the disinfection potential. This is commonly used when they want to measure the water quality. For example, E. coli, Salmonella, Listeria, and other types of bacteria have survival times of under 30 seconds when the ORP is above 665 millivolts, compared against 10 times that amount of time, which is over 300 seconds, when it is below 485 millivolts. So when you increase the charge, bacteria can't survive as well. And this has a massive effect. Based on my understanding, ORP is determined by how much oxygen is in the water, and oxygen is negatively charged. Easy water has more oxygens per hydrogen, so it has more of a density of oxygen, more of a ratio. What that means is the higher the EZ, the higher the ORP. If you add ozone to your water, which I am experimenting with, you are making the water more oxygen rich and giving it more of a negative charge. That's why ozone is such a powerful disinfectant in water systems. I actually bought an ORP meter to test my water and measure this. So I'm going to be testing what the ORP of my distilled water is versus other kinds of water. Some clarifications in the video. I mentioned that calories get excreted as CO2. The study that I mentioned was referring to what happens to the fat that we burn off when we lose weight. So it's a bit different, but I guess the idea is somewhat the same. I'll link to it in the post on my website. He mentions that sodium chloride decreases EZ. So I just want people to realize and be clear about this, that means table salt. So table salt decreases EZ. Obviously, we need table salt, but it's an interesting idea that if we have too much of it, then that would negatively impact the EZ in our body. Take care. Bye-bye.